I enjoy thrillers. One of my favorites is, in fact, Vince Flynn, who is referenced on the jacket of the book. And but this is a great one. This really pulls you in.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you. Nice work.
Thank you. I woke up 5 years ago, and it was one of those days. I think it was either New Year's Day or my birthday, and I woke up and I said to Shannon, Shannon, I always said to myself, I'm going to write this book, this great book, and get it published. And I started saying it to myself when I was 15 years old, and look at me, I'm 37 years old, I haven't done it. And she said, well, why don't you get up and start doing it? So I, literally the next day I got up at 5 in the morning and just started to write. And in fact, the first scene I wrote what is the same scene that I wrote that first morning.
Oh, gosh, isn't that something? So you did not time the scene for the events of the last several months with what's going on in oil rigs,
no.
the concern about energy and oil and all that. That just happened to be in the news at the time you were putting this together.
Exactly. I mean, if anything, the book has been it's been done for several years, and I worked in the energy industry, so I was a speechwriter appointed by the White House to write speeches for Secretary of Energy, and I wrote oil and gas speeches during the first Gulf War, and then I worked for Boone Pickens, and so I really learned the energy industry inside and out, and it's always been fascinating to me. I really think energy is one of these fundamental forces that are at play in our world. I mean, it's arguably as important as religion. It impacts governments, it impacts politics, it impacts our economy, it impacts everything. So I really, I knew I wanted to write about that. In the whole, everything that happened down in the Gulf, it's interesting because a lot of the politicians now are talking about, well, we need to create an America that's independent of the Middle East. And it's funny because some of the things that some of the senators and politicians are saying is actually similar to some of the things that some of the characters say in the book, fictitiously, which, it's kind of rewarding. It's a little bit eerie, but it's certainly fascinating.
Well, yeah, I must admit, as I read some of the dialogue from Teddy Marks, one of your heroes, and others, I did detect that there was a message being sent that some of the things you felt very deeply you were saying through the mouths of some of the most noble characters in the book. I mean, clearly energy is one of those topics, and the susceptibility to oil shocks and the way we can be blackmailed by other nations it comes out loud and clear. But I think a perspective on terrorism also comes out through the book. I mean, I would hope that people who read the book for fun and enjoyment, as I did, also will recognize the truth in terms of the vulnerabilities that you bring out. I mean, was that part of what got you to write this, or did you intentionally make those messages spoken through heroes?
What I was trying to set up is a conflict between what I think is best about America, and I think Teddy Marks is one of the guys who represents that, and obviously Dewey Andreas is the other. And the thing I like about Dewey is he's been disavowed by his government, by people in the government, and yet he risks his life to come back to help save the country he loves, which I think is really what patriotism is all about. I mean, he has every reason to not like America anymore, and yet he risks his life to come back and save it. And so I was trying to create this conflict between people that represent the best about America, and then in imagining who they would face, I tried to create realistic, authentic, plausible opponents. I didn't say, what is a typical terrorist going to do, a suicide bomber or something like that. I wanted to create a character who had brains, who had money, who had financial wherewithal. Really the most dangerous opponent that I imagined America could face.
I was interested in your perspective on jihadists, and you call them jihadists and jihad. You obviously have a view of the mindset of people who are pursuing that agenda. I mean, is it a valid mindset? I mean, how did you develop the character of Fortuna, the other, if you will, jihad cell leaders? what enabled you to sort of come up with how they would think, how they would perceive America, how they would live here? I mean, this obviously isn't firsthand experience, but
Right.
what formed the psychology of the characters that you write about?
Anybody who has been around since 9/11 can't help but be, if you're American, can't help but be very concerned about the rise of fundamentalist Islam. And I've become very interested in this phenomenon of jihadists and the thought that it's not just enough to have my own religious beliefs, but I need to try to impose them on others, and if necessary, I need to use violent means. And so I think really what happened and how I developed this idea that there were cells in America and that they were going after economic infrastructure was really just reading and studying and thinking about and trying to put myself in the shoes of someone who would try and harm America. I think you've talked about the fact, Mitt, that this is a long-term, multi-generational battle, and I think there are different ways that people fight it. I mean, you will fight it if you're elected president, if you're a statesman or whatever. You'll fight it in your way. I think what I was trying to say to myself is there something that I can do as a writer to try and keep people aware of it, and then help fight it as well. And so that was definitely part of my goal. I wanted to write a book that was relevant, that was authentic, and that really addressed some issues that were, I think, front and center for a lot of people.
Yeah, I must admit I was intrigued with the fact that with Fortuna, the antagonist in the book, that his motives are overwhelmingly jihad and religious, but there's also a strain of greed, a strain of jealousy and vindictiveness, of revenge. There are all these features swirling in him, and he's pulled in different directions. And there probably is truth. This is not just a one or two dimensional person, but that those that participate in this kind of awful effort to maim and brutalize others, do have a lot of things going on in their extraordinarily distorted minds. So nicely done. Let me ask you another. This is a simple thing, but I'm just curious. A lot of times, I'll read a book or I'll watch a movie, and I'll be willingly suspending disbelief, getting into the book, and then there will be some obvious error, some obvious fault that, oh my goodness, they wouldn't say that in that circumstance. They wouldn't do that in that circumstance, and it pulls me out of the book, pulls me out of the character, and I sort of lose it at that point. I've read the book. There weren't any of those. All of it to me seemed real, possible. Sure, there's some imagination and some expansion, but there was a complete avoidance of what I'll call these mistakes that prevent you from willingly suspending disbelief. How do you keep that from happening? I mean, do you go through and read the book and look for things that might be wrong? Do you get fact checkers? I mean, because in a book of this length, with so many characters and so many places, Colombia, Canada, Lebanon, Washington, Saudi Arabia, on and on and on. How do you make sure that there's not something that people go, oh, that's just wrong, he just doesn't know what he's talking about?
The most important thing for me with this book that I was aiming at was authenticity. That is really what I wanted to try to create, not something that was in any way, shape, or form superhero-ish. I wanted to try and create a story that actually could happen, that's one click away from what could happen in the next week. And to do that, it's tough because it does, when you're writing a book, the temptation is to, quote-unquote, gild the lily a little bit and to, sometimes make your good guy better than he is and make your villain worse. And so, but just a lot of research and then just, St. Martin's Press, who I know published your book, boy, think about almost like a filter where the first draft and the second draft go down through the filter. So many people touch it, and when it came down at the end of the day to the facts, a lot of little facts, the the copy editing and the fact-checking department at St. Martin's is just unparalleled. They caught so many things and really helped to do the book. So a lot of the accuracy it truly is a team effort.
Well, but there's got to be something also to your own research. I mean, I think about the description of the oil rig and what was going on in the oil rig, the pumping station at the bottom of the ocean. There were a lot of whole scenarios that you can't make up with a fact checker. You obviously had to have had some background or some research yourself in some of the places, some of the settings. I mean, did you literally go around and go to the kinds of places that you plan on writing on in the book?
I've been to some of them. I haven't been to all, but I think that the most important thing was just doing research and talking to people. When I worked for the Secretary of Energy, I was immersed in oil and gas, and really, I think a lot of the discussion around oil and what happens after the supply chain becomes interrupted by this terrorist attack, a lot of that really came out of what I felt, what I learned then from a policy perspective. And then in terms of physical settings, a lot of research, some travel. I think I nailed a lot of the bigger things. For example, the hedge fund aspect, the finance aspect. I really worked with my brother a lot. My brother is a partner at a big hedge fund in New York City, and he really helped me to architect a lot of the discussion and the analysis and the around what happens with hedge funds. And then a lot of the merger stuff I try to kind of pull out of my own experience in buyouts. If there was one part, Mitt, that I was worried that wouldn't ring true with you, it was that part, because you have so much experience doing that. But I think it was just a lot of research, some travel, and a lot just talking to people.
Obviously this book is saying something about terrorism, about political correctness in this country, about lack of understanding of terrorism in this country. You're saying a lot about energy, pointing out just how vulnerable we are to energy blackmail. These kinds of messages, I presume, flow in part from the fact that you did work with the Department of Energy. You worked in a gubernatorial campaign. You worked in business for a number of years, and so what you're saying in the book and the messages you're sending are probably related to what it is that you're doing in your life.
I want to take these big forces, these big issues like energy, like terrorism, and I think the trick that I tried to accomplish in the book, or the goal in the book, was to try to tell a very human story, to almost put the reader right in the cockpit as these big events are taking place. And I think that my experience, working at the White House, working with you, Mitt, working in finance, what I really hope that they help to do is create authenticity. And I think I'll never forget when I was an intern in the White House. Just a little anecdote, but Colin Powell was I believe the National Security Advisor, and he was walking through the West Wing, and he walked right up to me, and I noticed that on his suit he had kind of a stain on the suit, and it's the reason I remember it is because it was really the first time that I kind of said to myself, all these people around here who are making these very important decisions, President Reagan and Colin Powell and people like that, are in fact human beings. And they put on their pants one leg at a time every morning. And I think it was really, and I don't think people realize that. So a lot of the scenes in the White House, a lot of the scenes that take place in terms of how we react to a crisis, what I'm trying to do is say, how would this in fact take place? Don't give me a fictitious treatment of the president or of the National Security Advisor or the FBI. I want to show how real human beings are going to deal with these crises, and a lot of it comes back to that. Seeing Colin Powell that day and realizing he's a human being just like the rest of us, and to me that's a more, I think, compelling vision of for a thriller, which is to write something that in fact is about real people and how they deal with things, instead of superheroes.
Yeah, I think your depiction of Washington and the White House and the national security people was actually pretty accurate. It was not the world of make believe, but unfortunately a lot of real personalities at play.
Thank you today for taking some time to ask some questions.
Hey, thanks, Ben.
All right, man. Say hi to everyone, and I hope the rest of your summer goes great.
Thanks so much.
We'll see you down the road.